and you're tuned into Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. Well, welcome, friends, back to another episode of the show. And today we have, as always, a special episode for you guys. And Jasmin and I are going to be breaking down the script to the seventh episode of Stranger Things Season 4. Of course, I'm talking about the Massacre at Hawkins Lab, which most of you probably have already seen it. If you haven't, please go to Netflix and do not listen to today's episode because you will be spoiled. But what we're going to do here is it's not really going to be a recap episode, but we're going to be analyzing the script, which was released at the time of this recording about 2 weeks ago on Deadline, I believe. And this is the official script, folks. I'll link it in the description of the episode because it is the official script. You don't have to worry about any scams going on here. And this will be this is not just going to be one episode. We're going to have probably at least two, if not more, episodes to break this down because there is a lot to get to. There's seriously over 100 pages of this script, and it's wonderful. And for those of you who love writing, script writing, all that, then it's like gold right now. So, what we're going to begin by is just talking about some of our immediate reactions that we had to the script, like reading the script, and just some things that we noticed right off the bat. We're in this because, Jasmine and I did a lot of hard work for you guys, so you didn't have to, because we
like
cared.
the Sparks Notes version.
Yes, it is the
What they
SparkNotes
changed.
version.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Coles Notes.
Yes. And so because we care about you guys and we want to get this out there. So Jasmine, why don't you begin by just, telling the people what you noticed.
Yeah, I'm still working my way through the script, full disclosure, because it's so much content. The episode itself is an hour and a half, and
Jasmine,
it's over
don't
100
tell them
pages.
that.
Well, full disclosure, because I know you notice patterns, and I may not have noticed the patterns because I'm still going through it with a fine-tooth comb. So you're gonna notice, full disclosure, Ashley will notice patterns I have not noticed yet. But first reactions, I also did skim larger parts of it too, as well. So I guess first reactions is I think it's very interesting to see what they wrote originally and what wound up on screen. And I think there are several points where there is a big deviation from what they originally wrote to what we saw on our screens and what would be the original script versus canon, which I thought was very interesting. And something that really stood out to me is because I don't think we've ever, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we ever seen an official script, a full official script from the show before?
I haven't. I don't really know if there really is one that exists before this one,
Mm.
other than there was one. It's called Mom Talk, which was their original
Yeah,
idea. You
heard of
can
that.
find that one out there, which is definitely it's cool. I actually read that script. That's one of the first episodes of the podcast
Oh,
ever. So anyone out there, you can go back, listen to that. It's definitely a lot different than the Vanishing of Will Byers. I can definitely tell you that. Um,
I've
but
heard that. I've heard
yeah,
that definitely.
yeah, but I don't know of any others that are out there. Maybe whoever, if anyone's out there listening and you have any info on that, please let us
Yeah,
know. We'd love to hear that. So,
because I know they released portions of those scenes right on Twitter when they were
mhm.
doing that thing. So we have little bits, but not a full script. And something that really stood out to me was I hadn't really thought about I thought about the dialogue, but I hadn't thought about how they were describing the scene directions or the descriptions
Mhm.
that would be for the actors themselves. I really people really commented on this season how when you had subtitles on and it'd be squelching loudly,
Yeah.
this or synth pop plays ominously, and how great those were, and they were very descriptive,
Mhm.
which I love because I feel like it. They really described it for people. If you can't see it, I thought that was cool. And also I always have subtitles on when I'm watching things if I'm alone, so I love that. but I hadn't thought about the descriptions they would give for the actors. And something I noticed is that like they swear quite a bit in the descriptions, which I was not
Yeah.
expecting. And I'm like, right. So like I feel like this script is very grown up because in this season, because like, yeah, you couldn't describe the bats of like there's a lot of fuckers when the entire cast is 12. Or most
Yeah.
of them. Right? So I feel like that was the change. Like I feel like if we had, for example, a script from season 1, season 2, season 3, compared it to this script,
Mm-hmm.
this one is very obviously like, okay, all of the actors are, teenagers now, all the characters are older. The tone of the show reflects that, but I hadn't thought about how that would be described.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm interested because I think that really informs for places where there were ad libs or there were changes. I feel like that really informs the actors. Like when you read a script, but then like it dawned on me, I'm like, okay, well, they would have read this at table reads, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like when you're reading the table read and the description is like, oh, another one of these guys, like, and it's like, oh man, there's so many of these fuckers, like, what the hell? And like that's the description you're reading out. Like either somebody reads that out loud or you're reading it to yourself. You're reading it loud before you go
Mm-hmm.
to read your line. Like when you've prepped for it, because right, they get the scripts and you like you would. Because I guess you'd be given to them, and either you do them live or you might get them a little bit ahead of time. I'm not sure how they do theirs. Every show does it differently. But regardless, when you're sitting there and you're opening it and you're like, so I thought that was really I thought that was funny, and I liked that they kind of carried over the maturity and the acknowledgement that like these are not kids anymore. The entire thing should reflect that.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that. I thought it was funny. And I think I prefer it to. I've seen other shows where the actors got older and they still tried to go for that younger or more kid-like thing. And I know some people were like, "Oh, this season can be so much darker." I was concerned about that, but when they released that, ahead of time. But I actually like the end result because I'm like, yeah, I like that they acknowledged and worked with the grain rather than against the grain because
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it both ways, and that really stood out to me with the script. Um, and yeah, I think those are my first impressions. What were yours?
Yeah, it was kind of funny because when I was taking my notes, um, I was watching as I was reading the script, and I would like highlight, um, what was like the same and all that. And eventually I just stopped doing that because I noticed there were so many like minor dialogue changes, minor movement, motion, changes from the script to what was, the final product on screen. And I just noticed that how much leeway the actors have for improv. And I think that's such a great thing that the Duffers trust their actors enough to just let them, kind of dictate or control what's happening. They're not, this has to be line for line. And I really enjoy it because it looks more natural as a viewer to say it looks more, you know, human, I guess you'd say. Um, Now there were certain dialogues that were almost verbatim, and you could definitely tell they were like, "Hey, we needed you to say this as close to this as we have it written as possible." And a lot of that does come with the relation to the lore and the stuff with Henry Vecna one, whatever, and with Brenner and stuff, which I really appreciate them doing that. But yeah, it was really, really cool to see just truly how much improv there is because we've heard a lot about Millie Bobby Brown doing a lot of improv. Uh, so I'm like, okay, that's expected, but just to see how much the others improv as well was really cool. But it's also like uh you could also say, well, maybe it's not just solely improv, maybe it's just revisions or whatever when they because they've like revived the script like 5 times. You can see that like on the
Yeah.
second page. So I don't know if it was during filming they
Yeah,
decided to make changes. So
I kind of that vibe too, where I'm like, these could have been improvs, or they could have because they both wrote and directed this episode. So like I'd be like, this could have been an improv, or they could have gotten there the day of, they could have run through the lines. Because I watched an interview for some other show I was watching, and an actor said, that if you are on a show that allows improv, the typical rule is you do a take where you do the line exactly, or you might do a few if they really love that line. And then once you've nailed it and they're like, okay, we got it, then you can ad lib. And that's pretty industry standard from what I've heard. So it makes me wonder if like did they run it through the first time and they got it and they're like, I don't love how that sounds when you're actually saying it, or ad lib it a bit, like I don't know, I wrote this but I don't know if I'm loving it, like like I feel like it could be one or the other, a little bit of both. Like I feel like
Mm-hmm.
these are good actors, so I feel like they probably ran it through once, so they're like, like I don't, let me just take a coffee break. I'm just gonna we're just gonna mock this
Yeah.
and hand it back to them. Also, I think because with COVID, like I've heard from things I've seen with actors where like normally you're like snacking in the break room, like there's a lot of that kind of
Mm-hmm.
kind of in between takes, but with COVID you couldn't do that. So also kind of in between takes, I could see it kind of being like, oh, we're shooting this, they're resetting up, they're cleaning everything for COVID. Okay, let me just mock up the script and give it back to them. Like there's a lot more like wait time
Mm-hmm.
that was happening during COVID. So I could also see that kind of like, as a writer, when you've been working on something, you're like, I feel like I could touch that up. I feel like I could just tweak
Yeah.
a little bit. And then the nice part is you have like they filmed for what I think 360, what is it, 4 days or 360 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost a full year. Like I think because you have so many takes, you've done it so many times. When you go to editing, you can pick which take you feel is the best.
Yeah.
So I got that sense too. I'm like, it could kind of be. I kind of land on like a combination
Mm-hmm.
of all three, kind of. Yeah, that's where I fell.
Totally.
Um,
So I want to get into a few more plot specifics here. And, we'll just begin at the beginning of the episode. And we pick up right where we left off um, with Steve being attacked by the Demobats. And it's basically like all the dialogue and stuff is like basically the same as we see it.
well, actually, I
The only,
disagree on that because yeah,
yeah, like the
well, I
only.
think that
Go ahead.
yeah, well, I was just gonna say because like the essence of the scene isn't changed. I noticed that the actors swear and ad lib a lot more in the
Mm-hmm.
fight scene than is in the script. And it makes me wonder, I'm like, I wonder what they had to interact with. Because one of the Stepford Brothers said was like, season 3, it was a ball on a stick. And so this year they wanted to give them something to interact with. So I know Vecna was practical effects. I know a lot of the sets were. But I'm like, I wonder what they were interacting with the demo. Like, was it remote controlled? Like, because the way they're interacting, I'm like, that feels like something you would do if you were physically interacting with something, which makes me wonder if they had. I feel like they must have had something they were reacting to
Mm-hmm.
because I noticed that like Eddie swears a lot more in the final version versus the script.
Mm-hmm.
Also, he's a way more active participant. Like the Eddie from the script, and I think this is probably why he became such a fan favorite. Is the Eddie from the script is like this is new to him, so he's a bit more hesitant. He's a bit more not reserved, but he doesn't say as much. He's not interacting as much. Whereas I feel like the final Eddie we got was swears a lot more, interacts a lot more. Like he's bewildered by it all, but the minute he becomes part of it, he starts interacting a lot on the same level as the other characters,
Mm-hmm.
which I think makes them feel more real. So like, I think that was a positive change. Um, I also noticed like I had subtitles turned on. And I noticed that like when, for example, like Nancy and Robin are going after the bats, they're having an entire conversation about and to the bats and like yelling and swearing at them,
Mm-hmm.
which is not in the script, which I thought was a good addition. Because you can also see the way the characters react. Like you can see like Eddie screaming and swearing, but they also realize they're like trying to get the bats to come to them so they can kill them. They're like, come on, like they're
Mm-hmm.
yelling at them, trying to get them to come to them. But in the script, they're more like, yeah. So I like that. I thought that was a good change because like it changes the tone of it. And I also think you see each character's like development really well there, and like characterization, I should say, because Eddie's freaked out, but he's like, I'm going down swinging. And
Hmm.
then you have Robin who's freaked out, but she's like, please, like, come on, like, get it. Whereas Nancy's just had it and she's like, just going at it. And then
Yeah.
Steve's had totally enough too. Like Steve's like, ah,
Yeah.
like in the script, they describe that he takes the bat becomes mush. I feel like they tried to do that practically to look dumb, or they just realized when they got there that him like carrying it, like carrying in half made more sense. The way the Democrats like react physically, I feel like either they filmed it, it looked dumb, or they're like, hey, this would be more interesting. Um, so yeah, I like I think ripping apart made more sense.
Hmm.
Um, I also appreciated that like they took out, I think this was a good change. Like they took out Steve's line about seeing the sights and Eddie's like, but the
Yes.
bat's blocking the door.
Yes, I noticed that one. That's like the biggest discrepancy that
Yeah.
I noticed. And also, Nancy in the script says, "We can take cover in the woods, come on," but in on screen she just says, "The woods, come on," and they're just looking at the woods, which I thought was good because you don't really need her to say, "We can take
Yeah.
cover," because it's like, of course you can do
Obvious.
that. Just say, "Let's go to the woods and let's find out."
Yeah, and I feel like what they cut from this scene was either like I feel like those lines between Steve and Eddie would have made it more comedic, but
Hmm.
removing it makes it more like cinematic and dramatic, which it needed to be for you to really feel like the bats were a threat,
Yeah.
especially because it comes back at the end of the season with Eddie. I feel like they really had to sell that to us.
Hmm.
And again, I think there's stuff in the script where it made sense for them to write it, but then when they got to filming, it's like, oh, we can cut this. Like, first of all, they obviously had to cut for time because that thing was like the entire season was way over what it should have been.
Yeah.
So I can see changes where I'm like, if that hadn't been the case, and if COVID hadn't happened when and it did, if they'd been able to film normally, I feel like some of the stuff might have been included because they would have had a bit more time.
Hmm.
But there's stuff here that I can tell they definitely cut, like this in particular, but throughout the script where it's like, yeah, that's obvious if you've been following along. Like there's this part later where like when they take cover into Skull Rock, there's a few parts later too where it's like, yeah, that's obvious. Like they come back, like Robin says, oh, something about them guarding, oh yeah, blow them up and shoot them to get rid of so they're stopped guarding the door. It's
Hmm.
implied that obviously the bats are guarding the door back to the right side up,
Yeah.
because if they weren't, they just go back to the door. It's obvious. And something I appreciate about the show is that like it's obviously a show for smart people. Like you
Yeah.
have to have a certain level of like critical thinking and like media literacy to get it.
Exactly.
And I appreciate that they don't dumb that down. Like I
Yeah.
appreciate they don't hit you over the head with it. They and I think those are good ads, like to take something out when it's like, well, that's obvious. If you've been following along, that's obvious.
Yeah.
Um, and like you said, it makes more sense to include verbatim the things about the lore, which are never going to be obvious because this is like a thing they've created and they have
Yeah.
the Bible and we don't. Whereas other things, it's like, well, yeah, in that situation, this is just a logical conclusion. We can all make it ourselves. We don't need this to be like spoon fed to us.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. I appreciate that about this show as well because um, right before they leave to go to the woods, they turn back and they notice the Demobats circling around the gate. So, as an audience, it's implied
yeah,
there they can't go back through that because the bats are guarding it. So, I do
yeah,
appreciate they don't, you know, say to the audience, do you get that? You get that? You can't
exactly.
go in. Bats are
Um,
there, and it kills me when films or TV shows do that. And I'm not trying to call out any certain, but I
yeah,
noticed that a lot on Hallmark movies. I'm just telling you, it's like
it's
sometimes
that
the
time of the year,
writing,
and you're like,
it's
I
sometimes
know.
it can be a little cringe because
It's a
they
little
do
cringe.
that. And it's like you don't sometimes good cinema is just having your characters just be quiet and just let the
Yeah.
filming, the views speak for themselves. That's what I really enjoy about the Duffers and their writing style.
Yeah, I feel like it's show not tell, and it's very they tell you the things you would not understand otherwise, except for the
Yes.
upside down, but everything else is they're showing it to you and they're expecting that you are smart enough to follow along. And I like that. I feel like there's a relationship between creator and an audience. And I feel like everyone who works on the show really respects the relationship in the sense of like they're trusting you to be smart enough to get it. And in return, we
Hmm.
trust them to explain things we need them explained to us. Um, and the last point I want to make about this scene is, and I really hope we come back to this in season 5. So I'm sure you noticed it too, but at the end of that scene, um, it says that the camera pulls back to show all of Hawkins, the most epic shot they've ever done for like full on, the entirety of Hawkins, all covered
Hmm.
in vines and all this stuff. But in the final version, we just get a short pull back to like a little bit above the tree line. We have that located like radio tower, and that's it. And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we see a full size shot of all of Hawkins in the upside down in season 4. We see parts of it, but I don't think we see the whole thing. Correct me if I'm wrong there,
Yeah.
but I don't think we do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I don't think we ever see complete like aerial view
yeah,
of the upside down in Hawkins. I think probably the furthest that we that we've seen it is when Nancy, takes off, runs through the woods, and then she notices the Wheeler house across that
yeah,
field.
we see that.
But yeah, I don't think we didn't get a single aerial view, and I think that is by design when they, um, obviously before the final version of what we seen on screen was filmed, they probably were like, yeah, no, we can't let that cat out the bag too soon. We got to save that
Yeah,
for season
for
5. We
season
got to get
5.
more epic shots.
More epic shots, and I also feel like they're because they did that very cool. Probably my favorite shot of the entire season is when everybody's riding the bikes
Hmm.
and they turn to realize the upside down is physically upside down.
Hmm.
Wow, that was mind blowing. I feel like there's a good shot to be had there, parallel shot there where they do that in season 5 where you see the right side up and the upside down.
Hmm.
Um, I also feel like it might have been like I remember Sean Levy's comment. He's like, "We have helicopter money now. We're flying up a helicopter." Um, they obviously had to pick and choose what they were doing, and I feel
Hmm.
like a shot like that because it would have so much CGI because you could practically do something that large.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you could find the physical space on Earth to do something that large without a whole ass
Hmm.
town. Um, that was very expensive CGI, and I get why it's okay. We're gonna pull back just a little bit on this shot, kind of tease, and then we can do a larger, more epic shot like that in the final season. And I don't think it took away anything. I think seeing all of Hawkins would have been like, wait, what are we doing? Like it would have given more, but then the fact that they didn't have time to come back to it,
Hmm.
um, it also makes me wonder because I mean they would have written these scripts chronologically. So I'm like, I feel like they would plan stuff and they got to the end of it and they're like, oh my god, it's like over an hour, it's 2 hours. We gotta move some of this to season 5
Hmm.
because we're running. It's not gonna be a 5. We can't make it 5 hours. So I appreciate that because as much as I love this season, like I had to take multiple bathroom breaks and snack breaks. Some of that stuff was so long that
Hmm.
I'm like, if it had been any longer,
Oh
um,
yeah, totally.
yeah. So
So, then we get the scene with Sullivan and Agent Wallace. You want to talk about that one? It was a very brief scene. Nothing really happened other than Agent Wallace
yeah,
eventually succumbed to the torture, like we probably all would, and gave
yeah.
location, and said, just promise me you won't kill her, and well, he did not
Yeah.
promise. He did not
I
keep
love
that
that's the
promise.
only thing he asked for, and that's the first thing they immediately try to do. And
Hmm.
like I in the final scene, like part of me is like I don't want those guys to come back. At the same time, like, or I just want them to like show up at the scene and immediately get like blown up or something. Because like they drove. I know they're available, but they just drove me nuts. At the same time, though, I would love to see a scene in which like someone and his like people,
Hmm.
because you see the two people coming behind him when they come out of the bunker at the end there. I would love to see a scene in which they wind up in front of Joyce and Hopper because like I feel like that would be epic. So I'm kind of divided for season 5. Part of me is like, I hope these guys show up and immediately get destroyed by Vecna. On the other hand, I'm kind of like, I'd like to see them get taken down. I'd also be fine if they never appeared again. I don't know. I'm kind of divided on what I want to happen with that for season 5. Yeah.
Yeah, and just real quick, I still am unsure as to why they decided to bring on a character like Sullivan
Yeah.
this late in the game,
Mm-hmm.
because the way, when he talks with Owens in, I think, episode 3, it's implied that Sullivan is maybe the one, who's always been the one that's been after 11 really since season 1. Um, because
Yeah.
I think I've always thought there was a deeper reason behind why Hopper had to hide 11, and I don't think it really was
Mhm.
just because Brenner was alive and apparently out in Nevada. I think it was because of
Yeah.
Sullivan or someone like him within the um,
Yeah.
military. I just don't know why he's introduced this late in the game, and
Yeah.
maybe
And
next season will provide some clarity.
yeah, and I think to me what bugs me about like him and his group is that like they're so one-dimensional,
Hmm.
like they're cartoon villains. Because everybody else in the show, even the really dumb characters, you're like, you at least understand why they're dumb.
Hmm.
Like the deputies don't have a lot of brains, but you at least understand where that came from. Not that they're the villains, but you know what I mean? Um, but I think because they've been introduced late in the game, because we already have like Owens and we have Brenner and we have all the lab people, like because we've already been introduced to all those characters and how they fit in, and so many of the characters I think are so complex and interesting. When you have other characters that have been introduced late in the game who are so one dimensional and just very cartoonish and also very dumb. Like that's the thing. Like this is supposed to be like they're supposed to be top military brass, and they're so incredibly stupid. Like that just I could not get over that. I'm like just their actions. Like they're taking Owen's adult son's like projects from school out of his house as if
Hmm.
he'd hide it in an obvious place. This guy's not dumb. Like,
I know.
right? Or then like they show up at the bunker and he's like take and like Owens makes like a legitimate logical argument there. He's like, if you're right and I'm wrong, I'll do it myself. But if I'm right and you're wrong, we're gonna need her. And he does take the shot. Who won? Like, how do you get the top? How do you get to be top military and knowingly take out somebody or try to take out somebody who could be your only shot at saving humanity?
Yeah.
Like, how are you that stupid from a tactical standpoint? So that also got me. I'm like, these people I lack the intelligence of like the children on the show. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like Holly Wheeler's got more intelligence than these guys. I'm just saying. I'm
Yeah.
just saying. So I'm not, yeah, I'm with you there. Like there's obviously more going on, but they come across as so cartoonish that I'm not like also because I feel like I think because it's not rooted in reality. Not that there aren't people like that. I don't mean like that, but like the other villains we had this season, like Vecna, you get his whole backstory, right?
Hmm.
And Brenner and Owens, we know where they're coming from. Not that Owens is the villain, but you know, in kind of the larger landscape,
Hmm.
um, the role he plays. But then, like with the Satanic Panic and Jason and all that stuff, it's horrible. But because that stuff actually happened, like that was a real thing, as insanely stupid and hysterical as the whole thing was, that has a basis in reality. So like I can, even if I don't like love it as a plot, I can
Hmm.
get why they're going there. I understand. I can get into it. But like I think because they've introduced Sullivan and the gang so late in the game, and they're just so incredibly stupid and one dimensional that I'm this is not jiving for me.
Yeah.
Um yeah. Speaker of which I have thoughts on the like needed project bunker scenes. Do you have thoughts on that?
On the scenes that come next,
Yeah.
yeah, I do.
Okay. So
Um, so we get 11 with the Coke can. She's regressing. There's not much that I noticed that was different about that, other than they said like different few different phrases. And then after that, we get the monsters and superheroes. Um, Brenner tells 11 that stuff of myth and um, legend. But then after that, we get the first major discrepancy that I noticed. so far between the script and the on-screen version, and that is when 11 finally agrees to journey back into the past one last time, and Brenner, goes and gets the VCR tape, and then we get back to Brenner and Owens from the observation booth after 11 gets back into the tank. And then on screen, Dr. Owens asks Dr. Brenner, how much time did you skip? But in the script, he asks Brenner, how many months did you skip? And which I noticed. So it kind of had me thinking, like, why would they change this? I definitely didn't think this was improv or ad lib. Like, I think they purposely told um what's his name, Paul Reiser, to say time instead of months. It could just be one of those things where it's like, we can't really give a specific time frame for this, or else we'll have to go back and explain it. And if that's something they didn't want to do next season, they didn't want to do
I
that.
mean,
Or it means, I just kind of wonder what else, like, what more was Brenner planning to do? What more was there to show her? Because we see it in episode 8 when he's trying to convince her to stay. He's like, your training is not complete yet. We're going to finish our work. And, then he says, one day you'll learn the truth, Levin. And again, I think there's, you know, more to it. Like in season 1, we never really get a timetable of exactly what years those are when we see 11 crush the Coke can. Is that 1979 or is that 1983? I just found that really interesting that they changed that phrasing completely. What did you think?
actually, I didn't catch that. That was I caught other things in that scene, but I didn't catch that they changed months to time. So that's a good catch. I Yeah, to me, it either reads like the Duffer Brothers realizing they needed to give themselves more leeway
Mm-hmm.
with that timeline. Although to be fair, the whole controversy about like, oh, you screwed up Will's birthday and like all that stuff didn't happen till after this stuff had aired. So, um, maybe I'm seeing a self-awareness there that wasn't there yet,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they went to film it and they were like, let's do time because that gives us more leeway. And I agree, like they don't establish what year that is. Like I feel
Mm-hmm.
like what we see in season 1 has to be closer to 1979 than it is to 83. But then, like we've talked about in some previous episodes, it's like, okay, well, what happened during the intervening years? Because we see what happened in 79, but it's not till 83 that 11 escapes, and she escapes the same way that Henry taught her.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've talked about this. I want to see how that happened. What was the catalyst? Like, what was the push that got her to finally be like, I have to escape? Because that happens, and then Brenner has her for like several more years.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it that finally was like, I have to get out of here? And because I guess you could argue that she saw like the Demogorgon and it scared her,
Yeah.
but it's not like that place wasn't scary.
Yeah.
So like what was the catalyst specifically, or if that was it, like I feel like there's got to be more to it. And yeah, I feel like they're trying to give themselves leeway because okay, this gets me. So when Brenner walks into the room with all the tapes, like because like the bunker wasn't destroyed, and we know that the other military guys left, so presumably like Owen still has those tapes,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that's the end of that because like one of my pet theories is that like do you know how I've said that like I think Will's gonna have powers next season, or he might. That's something they might explore and like figuring out why Vecna let him live and the whole thing. I feel the answers is somewhere in those tapes, and if he had previously been at the lab, like I feel like that information is in there. So I see them like Owens talked about that other facility that they had that they could reach by nightfall.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of seeing a situation in which like like Elle and Will go out there with like Joyce and Hopper, and it's one of those things where like, hey, let's try to figure out what happened here because the only person who understood this was Brenner, and Brenner's gone, hopefully. Um, so I don't think they just showed us that room for no reason. Like I think we're gonna come back to that, and I think the answer I think it'd be really cool to see a lot of the lore revealed through flashbacks
Mm-hmm.
of like Elle and Will going through it. Um, so I think that would be super interesting. But yeah, that's a good catch. The ones I caught were, and I really like this, is so when Owens and Brenner are looking through like the observation room and Elle's trying to crush the Coke can, um, Owen and Brenner's lines are verbatim, um, until you get to the end there and Owens adds, "Good for us," and he walks away.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that line because that I don't know if that was an ad lib that he added or if that was a direction, but I like it because it really humanizes Owens in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Without that, I don't think it would have humanized him because it's when you realize he's been working with Brenner and there's scenes where like Elle runs
Mm-hmm.
and they inject her and that keeps happening. And we've just had that scene where Brenner has the audacity to be like, this place is not a prison. Like
Yeah.
that whole thing. I think it really humanizes Brenner or sorry, Owens rather, because that moment where it's like he doesn't want to be doing that because up to that point you're like I remember when we were watching it live I was like oh like when he's helping out of the elevator and everything I'm like wow like I feel like them saving his life is really really stuck with this guy and and it lulled you to that false sense of security and then you turn the corner and Brenner is there and it's like god damn it Owens but then that moment really humanizes him for me because it's like he doesn't want to be doing this but Brett is so slick, so charismatic that he's convinced Owens this is the only way. And you can see that turning point where Owens is like, maybe this guy's just been fucking with me the whole time. And he's just doing this so he can screw with her. And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, God damn it. Because like as they established at the beginning of this season, Owens like I was kind of wondering who Owens went home to, you know what I mean? So as they
Mm-hmm.
established, like this guy is a husband and father. His, he has a life. He was a doctor before he was involved in all this stuff. He
Mm-hmm.
still is technically. Um, there's a line, I think it's in season 2, where Hopper and Joyce are leaving the lab and Hopper says, like that, this post-traumatic stress stuff, like that's real. And if
Mm-hmm.
you think of a degree, this guy's got it. So I think Owens is ultimately a doctor first,
Mm-hmm.
right? And whereas Brenner is a scientist first and foremost, so he justifies it all in his mind. But I
Yeah.
like that moment really humanized Owens, where it's like he doesn't want to be doing this, but he's like, well, good for us. Like we're traumatizing this poor kid, and this isn't working. And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, since Owens obviously knows more than what he's letting on to, I mean, to the characters, and we kind of see some of that with him and Brenner. It's like Owens knows the threats that they're facing, which makes me wonder when there was the now memories and they kept saying it was in Will's head.
Mm-hmm.
Did Owens actually believe that? Or did he know what was out there and he didn't want to scare them?
Yeah.
Because you could say it's nefarious, but you could also say, like, if they told them what was out there, I'm pretty sure Joyce would have had a complete meltdown. And it's very scary for Will. So it's like,
Yeah.
is he hiding it for a nefarious reason to protect himself? Or is it bigger than that? Because he says, I've been dreading this for a long time that implies he got
Yeah.
the files when Brenner left, like if they've been working together the whole time. Like I feel like this guy knows more. So I really like that they humanized him in that moment, especially because as a character, like I fully expect him to come back um next season. Owens that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I fully expect, I hope they do this, that part of um the revealing of the lore is Hopper and Joyce like getting him to make a house call and be like, okay, if we're gonna do this, like if we're gonna do this and we're going to like basically save the world, this is like the final showdown, you have to tell us everything. Because we're not going in there without all the possible information. Like that's the deal.
Yeah.
And I could them pulling up the files and him like laying it all out there
Mm-hmm.
because I think it would fit, it would make sense with this character for me for it to be revealed, for like Carpenter to be very suspicious, and then when it's all revealed, it's like, oh, you weren't hiding this to be a dick about it, you were hiding this because this is so much worse than what we thought, like so much worse, and we didn't want to scare them. But it's like, well, if you're going down there to fight this thing, you should know this, or something in there being helpful to Will and Elle, and they figure it out.
Mhm.
So I'm fully expecting that. I'm looking forward to it. Some other things I noticed from those scenes are we have the flashbacks to what happened to the other numbers when Elle is trying to crush the cocaine, but not when her and Brenner are talking in her room, which I thought was a good choice because it made sense when she's trying to crush the cocaine, but I feel like they'd also included them in the scene between Elle and Brenner. It would have taken away from the actors.
Mhm.
And something I loved about this season was that there were so many character moments where you just had like two characters in a room or in a situation, or a few of them, and so you had very close character moments that were just kind of centered on the actors, nothing else, just them two and their dialogue, um, which I think really showed off. Like I've always said that the acting on this show is fantastic, but I think it really showed when you can just zero in on two characters and just do
Mhm.
like a quiet character moment. I feel like, and I think it was the right call to kind of remove some of the other stuff to just focus down, be like, hey, you've made your point. Let's focus down on these two actors because we know they
Mhm.
can. I feel like that sense of trust. They know they can deliver
Mhm.
that, and I like that it shows that trust in the actors to deliver just a very serious scene or with great gravitas. Um, so I love that. And something else, I'm sure you noticed this too, but the Brenner, as he's described in the script, is a lot more hesitant, and you see a lot more uncertainty.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
than
did.
in the show.
I also
Um,
saw it as he seemed like a more understanding
yeah,
Brenner in the script than on
yeah,
screen because going back to what you were saying about um when Dr. Owen says, good for us, and then he walks off, which he didn't say that in the script, by the way. They added that. Um, but after Owen says that and leaves, in the script it says, on that note, Owens heads out. Brenner just keeps his gaze trained on 11, and Owens is not wrong. She looks distant, lost, scared. And that's when he goes to talk with her and give her the monsters and superheroes talk. So yeah, I mean, he definitely seems to be more understanding and maybe a little bit more thoughtful of her feelings and what she's going through in the script, as opposed to on the screen. And on screen, it's like you said, he's the scientist first, but he's just trying to get this child on board, um, so that he can have more daddy daughter time, uh, to use a quote from Dr. Owens. And I mean, what he tells her is not really wrong, about, life is not as simple as categorizing everything into monsters and superheroes. But you definitely can tell on screen that he's just like, yeah, yeah, like, just please just go get in the tank, okay? It's not a prison here, just do what I say, okay? You know.
yeah. And I don't know, to me, that's down to Matthew Modine's performance because
Yeah.
I feel like the way he carries himself as Owens, which I think he does a really good job. Because not only do you buy it, but I feel like, well, I get what they were trying to do in the script to make him more, maybe add more dimension to him and make him
Hmm.
more sympathetic or understandable. I ultimately really like the decision they made there, where either they saw what the actors were doing and they just went with it, or there was a conscious choice. To me, I kind of felt the actors brought that and they were like, okay, we're just gonna go with this because they've done that before and it's always worked out really well. And I like that they trust their actors to be like, okay, this is what we wrote for you. But if this feels more right to you as the character,
Hmm.
we trust you to kind of go with that. Which I think is great. Um, so I love that. And I also think because Owens winds up more humanized with those little ad libs and stuff, I think the contrast between Brenner being like the scientist first, completely self-assured, versus Owens being like, he's really down everything they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's putting on a brave face here, but he does not have the confidence in this at all. I liked that contrast, and as in terms of who lives and who dies in this universe, I liked that the guy, like Owens is the only character I would say out of all the government lab people we've ever really get to know where you feel like he has a soul. You feel like he does care, he is
Mm-hmm.
conflicted. Whereas everyone else just feels like a scientist or a government agent, and they just don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what makes him so interesting. And I liked that contrast. I liked that we got that contrast between someone who's so self-assured like that, someone who's doubting it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ultimately it was the better choice, because I think for Brender's character, I think the way Matthew Modine played that makes more sense from his character, because from that scene where we met with him in Hopper in season 1, where he's like surprised that like a handshake deal fixes the whole thing basically.
Uh-huh.
This guy's a true believer. This guy's a scientist first. Everyone else is here for the job. But Brenner truly believes he's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that made sense, because later on, when he tries to force Eleven to stay, and he calls him on that, and she's like, no, we're in this mess because you couldn't stop searching for Henry. And all these people are dead, and you don't seem to care. And he reminds her what he did to her mother, and he justifies it. He doesn't hesitate. He justifies. He believes he's 100% there, and only when he's dying do we see an inkling of like, maybe this wasn't the best idea. But to me, that's as the life drains out of you. Obviously, you think back, right? You
Mm-hmm.
consider. But up until that point, he's 100% sure, and to me, that what makes him believable. I think if we had that doubt, or that level of doubt to him or understanding, I feel like it makes it some way less compelling, because like, well, if you're doubtless, why are you doing it? Like, I believe that in a character like Owens, because you can understand where he's coming from. I don't think I'd buy it in Brenner. I think Matthew made the right choice there, because he's completely self-assured, completely sure what he's doing. To him is all justifiable. And I think that's what makes the character work. Like, he's the villain, but he's also like, he's so convinced he's right that, like, you see how he sells people on it, because he's so convincing. He's like the used car salesman of like whatever the heck you're gonna call this. You know what I mean? Of like 80s experiments. Like that's who he is 100%. And I believe he was always that guy. Like, I don't believe there was a younger Brenner that was not that guy.
Mm-hmm.
100% was always that guy. Like, he was trying to swindle kids as like a child. Like, 100% he was always that guy.
Oh yeah, totally. He's definitely snake in the grass.
Yes, definitely 100%.